Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you are new to the KM Institute, we are home to the Certified Knowledge Manager program. That's the global #1 certification in KM. And if you would like more information on that, you can click on that little CKM button there and come down to that. We're also known for our specialist curriculum, where we take a deep dive into a specific KM topic. One of those happens to be organization development, and that topic we're eager to talk about today with our guest instructors. But if you're interested in any of these, just let us know. We'll be happy to send you details on those topics where we take a deep dive. And of course, we're known for our great free content. If you want to go to the webinar section here at the top right corner and just come down to webinar series, you'll see what's coming up. And if you scroll down, it's chronological. You'll see all of our mini webinars in recent months. And I like to give a personal nod to our top 5 themed webinars, which John Hovell, who's here co-hosting today, hosts the top 5 webinars, and we usually have a subject matter expert sit in with John for a good hour conversation, a deep dive into that topic. So if you'd like to learn more about that, just go ahead and keep scrolling down. You'll see there'll be many more top 5 themed webinars here as well. And also check out the blog area for KM articles that we're posting, which is several per month for our SMEs, our instructors, consultant friends who are out there in the trenches writing for KMI. So do check that out for additional free content as well. All right, so let me hand it over to our hosts today. We have Dr. Sharon Varney and John Hovell, both instructors of the new OD certification program here at KMI. And they're here for kind of a part 2 discussion, Sharon, about this great topic. We did this a few months ago, so we'll make sure that you have access to that webinar link as well. And we are recording today, so we'll have this available in a few days. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our instructor team, and thank you very much for hosting today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eric. So, yeah, let me start. So here I am, Henley-on-Thames in the UK. It's just starting to get dark out here. Absolutely delighted to be with you this evening for me here in the UK. My background is, I would say I'm an OD practitioner, organisation development practitioner. Get involved in a lot of leadership development, change, OD and org design work. But we'll reveal a little bit more about what all that means later as we get into the content. Over to you, John. Where are you calling in from today?
Sure, let me try. Let's see if I can get... Can you see me for a second? So I'm away from here, but I'll turn video back off. Yes, I'm in transit on my way to Henley to be co-facilitating with wonderful Sharon this week. But yeah, I got stuck with a couple minute late trains, and so apologies. I'm at a train station. I found the quietest corner I could to chat from here. So yeah, excited to chat about KMOD. Sharon, similar to your background there, I started more in information management, information technology, then added in knowledge management, then added in organization development, then added in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and maybe even a little bit of Gestalt psychotherapy and what we now like to call conversational leadership. So quite a few different disciplines, love them all. And yeah, I think on this call, we're hoping to bring together KM and OD a little bit, right, Sharon?
Yeah, you know, the question that Eric posed, which I thought was a great one actually, is why should more knowledge managers use organization development methods? So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, John? So you started in knowledge management, you added OD. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for asking. And it's fun to think about. And I haven't, we prepped a little bit, but this is intentionally meant to be kind of a story on the fly, see what pops up for me this time. So yeah, I would even go one baby step before knowledge management, really starting in information management, information technology, web development, software development, writing code is really where I started my professional career. And then frankly got frustrated with writing code and maintaining code and what we used to call users, as opposed to people, being so frustrated with all the websites and nothing ever working and not what they wanted and no one felt included. And I was whining to a friend of mine about how difficult IT is, and I'm not sure I can spend a whole career doing that, if I'm quite candid with you. And he said to me, he was a graduate from the George Mason University near Washington, D.C. master's program in Organization Development Knowledge Management, ODKM. That program is now in cohort 28 as we speak, starting this semester. So that master's degree brings together the two of them. I thought, this is back in the 90s, I thought OD, when he said KMOD, I thought OD was org design. It was like structuring organizations and strategy work and mission work and that kind of stuff. And I sort of had no interest in that, or very little. But the KM side is what he was really pointing me towards. And so I thought, interesting. I've never really heard of it. I think Google barely existed, or had been around a couple of years at that point. So I got on Google or Yahoo or whatever it was, and I looked up knowledge management. And the very first article I found was The Nonsense of Knowledge Management, Nanaka and Taguchi, talking about how information is different from knowledge. Information can be managed, but knowledge cannot be managed. And I was hooked. Instantly, I thought, oh, if it's so hard and so impossible, then I'd like to try and jump in and see what small part I can play in all of it. So then fast forward just a little bit of finding how difficult knowledge management really was, and to this day still is. One of the primary challenges being, and I hope for people on the call this resonates, getting buy-in for knowledge management. We have all these great KM tools and techniques and beliefs and mindsets and skill sets and tool sets and practices, and yet we'll often be inside a hierarchical type of organization, not always, but quite often. And in that hierarchy, there's either senior level not bought in, or individual contributor level not bought in, or middle managers not willing to integrate, collaborate across middle management roles. And so this buy-in challenge was a struggle even from the beginning, from my experience in KM. So I tried KM techniques to get buy-in for KM. I tried communities to practice to get buy-in. I tried organizational network analysis to get buy-in. I tried value network analysis. I used KM techniques to try and get buy-in for KM. And quite frankly, it never worked. So that's when I then went back to my friends and other colleagues in this George Mason program and said, tell me more about this OD thing. What is it again? Because I thought it was reorgs. And they said, no, that's org design. We're talking about org development. Org development is group dynamics and applied behavioral sciences and positive psychology and what's going on in this group right now. And I said, oh, wow, I think that's exactly what I've been looking for to get buy-in for KM, is this whole other discipline of OD. And then again, my whole new fire started. Just like I loved KM, continue to love KM to this day, now a shared love for OD and this fascination with not only how do groups work, and why do people behave differently in groups, but how do I work? How does this body serve its purpose? How do I understand who I am? What am I bringing to KM? What am I bringing to OD? What do different groups need? Yeah, so I think I'll pause there because I could probably go on forever. How does that land for you, Sharon?
Yeah, I think I love the way that you kind of brought that question, because I think that's a really key question, is how do we get buy-in? And so one of the things that where I came into KM was as director of the Henley Forum at Henley Business School, where I just happened to be camping out for this webinar. And I, as I say, come in with this organization development and learning background, and added in knowledge management. And I met so many amazing people doing amazing work, but actually the questions that were coming up over and over again were, how do we land this change with people? So we've got the great tools, we know how to do things. So I think it's a slightly different angle on the buy-in question, which is, well, not just how do we get buy-in, but how do we really land things with a land change, land new tools with people. And so very, very deliberately and very inclusively, I said, well, let us work together, because actually there are communities in many large organizations who are all doing this kind of stuff, and sometimes in isolation. how about we join up and share some of our best tools, our best methods. And so one of the things that really pops up for me, John, from what you were saying there, you said knowledge cannot be managed, and that was a real kind of, moment for you. But actually, people cannot be managed. And, I think as soon as we drop that pretense of we can manage people as though they were things, we can manage people as though they were resources, that for me is, I think, a first step into OD, organization development kind of methods. So thinking about people as people, and however many of us on this call, and from all different backgrounds and places, we don't fit neatly into boxes, except on this Zoom screen where we conveniently do. But actually in real life, I don't think people can be managed. So then we come back to what you're saying about really group dynamics. So my question often for KM folks who came to the classes is, are you trying to keep everything the same with knowledge management, or do you really want to land change with people? And of course, time after time, the answer was, yeah, we're really trying to land change with people. So back to you, John. What do you make of that? Are there resonances with your experience there?
Let me see if I can get off mute. There we go. Yeah, we've worked together for a while, Sharon, and that was beautifully said. I hadn't heard you use the can't manage people words before. I love it. Yeah, tend to agree. I think maybe what I'll add a little bit, and then I know we want to talk about sort of our oversimplified OD map or diagram that we can share in a moment here. I think just building on your words, what I might add is the KM techniques are often for improved collaboration, improved innovation, decision making, sense making, that kind of process improvement, that kind of working together. I just love those KM techniques in partnership with OD techniques, and I'll try not to drop too many buzzwords or jargon, but like OD things that are different from KM techniques, that when partnered together, it's the landing of the change I heard you talking about. Not so much managing people or even managing tasks or projects. It's creating an environment for knowledge to flow from the KM side, and understanding the impact you're having on yourself and understanding the impact you're having on others from an OD point of view. And I just love that combination of things coming together.
Yeah. And there is something beautiful. So John and I were working together last week running an OD program in an organization. And what came through really strongly is OD as process. So when and anybody can do OD. The great news is you don't need an OD job title. We're super clear about this. So it's a mindset, it's a skill set, it's a tool set. We think it's useful in all kinds of jobs, but really very useful in KM. And because it's so strong as a process, it's processes for working with people, for helping people find their own change, to rather than kind of creating buy-in by showing what a shiny thing we've developed. It's really connecting into what they absolutely care about. And there's so many tools and processes. And I think one of the things I want to say, and why we developed this model, is because it is a vast field. It's absolutely vast. And so one of the challenges is lots of people dip a toe into OD and go, I don't really understand it. What is OD? It's so big. So I think while it's oversimplified, I would really hope that this is a very useful model. So I'm going to share my screen, and while I click a few buttons, John, maybe talk a little bit about the model that's going to pop up on the screen
Sure.
any minute.
So in a second, you'll see 3Ds and use of self. And maybe that's the OD side. So let me kind of keep coming from the KM side for a minute. I'm going to make an assumption that most everybody is familiar with people process technology as a framework, as one way to look at KM. And I'll also further the assumption that many KMers would agree, well, that's not all of KM, and yet that's a nice big broad. You could spend an entire career in KM doing nothing but culture change and people work and human work. Great. You could spend an entire KM career doing process improvement and focused on the processes of KM. Great. We know many people spend an entire KM career on the technology, the software, the tool side of KM. Great. So people process technology, one way to look at it. You'll often see governance or strategy or data or content or business intelligence, something added in as a fourth part of those like 3 pillars. Great. So way oversimplified. I'm hoping that's resonating. I'm assuming lots of people here are KM people first. So that's exactly what Sharon is saying here. These 3Ds are not the only things in OD. It's not the only way to look at OD, but Sharon and I happen to love it. That it, like people process technology for KM, you're not missing too much major. It's a nice way to look at it. The other thing I would tie this to is for those that have seen Nancy Dixon's 3 eras, or now she just updated it to 4 eras of knowledge management, information management, experience management, idea management. And now I think for her 4th era, somebody can put it in chat. It's something like the creating knowledge era. She just published it recently. This chart is also similar to the eras. We have a whole separate chart that kind of shows the decades where these 3Ds kind of came up. But Sharon, back over to you. Which D should we start with, or how should we describe the framework?
Well, the 3Ds are probably buckets of tools. So on the KMI course, we introduce all of the buckets, and we experience some of the tools. We can't have a fully experiential journey today, but I think we can start to clarify what's in the bucket. And I wonder with diagnostic OD whether that's a good place to start, because that's where organization development actually started, which was collecting data about organizational challenges and reflecting it back to the organization. So John, I wonder from a KM perspective, what particular tools really jump out for you from a kind of diagnostic OD approach, and how do they link back to KM?
Yeah, I love it. So let's try. So I want to throw some dates out here too. So if knowledge management started around 1995, give or take a couple of years, OD started around 1947, give or take a couple of years, maybe even decades. Sometimes people will debate, but give or take. So just point there being OD does have some decades of experience on KM. So collecting data, if we way oversimplify diagnostic, like Sharon just said, like collecting data to then intervene with a system. It took a specialist to do surveys or to do time and motion studies, or all this language they used decades ago in OD. Great. Comparing that to KM, I would say this is our world of SharePoint. The diagnostic OD is like the information management beginnings of KM, just like it's the beginnings of OD. And the diagnostic is so similar, right? Diagnostic, gathering data and trying to understand a system or a group using that data. Okay, so now let's try and gather data to try and understand knowledge. Do you not just right away see DIKW, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, just like we talk about in KM? This is how close the parallels are between OD and KM. So yeah, the tools I would talk about in diagnostic are literally software tools. I would talk about, the Microsoft suite of everything. I would talk about Power BI. I would talk about SharePoint, the Atlassian suite of tools. To me, those are all explicit knowledge where we can actually do some management of information, and we can gather data, gather information even, and then try to make sense of the knowledge sharing environment we've got. But I'm gonna make this big assumption that many of us on this call would say, yeah, that's a lot of what my job calls me to do, but KM is even more than, writing knowledge base articles or maintaining a knowledge base of some kind. There's so much more we can do in KM, and OD would say the same thing. Diagnostic is one part of trying to understand a group, is gathering data. There's at least two other ways. But before we move on, what else would you add about diagnostic, Sharon?
Yeah, well, I was thinking back to last week when we were working with Lindsay, and Lindsay brought in a challenge which I would think was quite a knowledge management challenge. So for her organization, she had 2,500 documents that were moving from one site to another. They didn't have owners. There were kind of all kinds of challenges there. And we used a tool called a force field analysis. And live with Lindsay and with her colleagues, we invited her to talk through the particular challenge that she was working on, and we all worked really hard. Well, they did. We were facilitating the process, and they were listening really hard for, well, what is helping Lindsay with this challenge, the forces for, and what is perhaps getting in the way of this particular challenge, and actually mapped it up. So, behind us, you could just imagine big old whiteboard, lots of post-its, very visual. And so far, it doesn't sound very OD, does it? What really makes it OD is kind of, when she comes back in and we don't, it's, well, what does this suggest for you? How would you balance some of the forces for and the forces against? What does it mean? Where are your solutions? So I just wonder if that kind of brings it to life, hopefully, a little bit for some of the people on this call today. How do we do it in an OD way is really facilitating that process of diagnosis.
Of diagnosing what's going on in the group. And so I hope I'm not sharing too much to say the force field analysis sort of released or raised awareness for two things. She didn't have the resources to get the job done. And in her own words, more importantly, it was high priority for her to get the job done, but low priority for everyone else. So what she was really struggling with was priority and resources. That's a very OD lens on a challenge. Now, if we had a bunch of KM people in a room and running a KM workshop, what she was trying to do, again, I hope I don't say too much, she had something like 2,000 documents and they were all out of date, and she needed a way to update links inside those documents. Well, for me, not even really from a KM point of view, from an information management point of view, you write a macro, you write a script, you get some way to go in and look for links and click on the link. And if you get a 404 error, then you update the link and you're good to go, right? Like very different analysis. Like, is it about priority and resources, or is it about, updating documents and managing things in that way? So that's where, again, these two fields I think could work together way more. Both are a challenge for her. She's not going to get IT resources if she doesn't already have them or have priority and funding to get them. So it's almost chicken and egg a little bit. And yeah, it's a perfect example of one we just had last week in real life.
Yeah, fantastic. And just for everybody on the call, what we want to do is just give a little sense of Dialogic and dynamic OD, but we really would love your questions. So we're keeping an eye on chat. There's already a really good question about buy-in and presentation. So Carrie will come back to that one definitely later. But do please put your questions into chat, and we'd love to involve you in the conversation as well. So while you're listening and also framing your questions, let's move into Dialogic OD. And we're really lucky to have John Hovell on the call here, because he's an expert in this area. And I know you don't like that term, John, but tell us a little bit about Dialogic OD and from your point of view.
Well, flattered. Thank you. Yes, I do. I prefer expertise to expert, because I believe no one of us is as smart as all of us, or the expertise is in the network as opposed to an individual. So I'm part of the complexity, but yes, I do love it. And yes, this is, I must admit, I even hear like the giddiness in my own voice. This is the most exciting of the Ds for me, because if I just give it to you really direct, my own personal view, Dialogic OD is a really fancy word for knowledge management. I think they are literally synonyms. Now, there are some differences. We could do a whole Venn diagram on similarities and differences, but if you really unpack what's going on in Dialogic OD, it's conversations, it's innovation, it's getting people together to talk about tough things, it's solving problems by involving the group. It's, as opposed to diagnostic, which was gathering data to try and understand what's going on in the group, Dialogic is let's talk about what's going on in the group. The big difference would be in OD, we would talk about content and process. How are we talking about this thing? Let alone what is the content? What are we actually trying to solve or talk about in terms of content? Now, guess what we do in KM, right? We've got liberating structures. We've got 35 different conversational techniques coming directly out of KM as a field, right? Nancy White and many others have created liberatingstructures.com and all these different, pulled together these 35 different techniques. OD would love to go to liberating structures and say, oh, these are 35 OD techniques. KM would love to go in and say, these are 35 KM techniques. That's how close Dialogic OD is to KM. The sort of processes we follow are so similar. My good friend David Gertine, right? His favorite go-to KM solution for every KM challenge is the Knowledge Cafe. Guess what? Knowledge Cafe and World Cafe are often listed as not only liberating structures, but also OD techniques, right? So it's conversational. It's from OD, admittedly, you're trying to sort of understand group dynamics. I don't want to say tensions, but to make it easy, like, is there tension in this group? Is there laughter in this group? Is this group getting along? Are we as efficient as possible? What's the dynamic? What's going on in this group? Versus in KM, we're sort of looking for what are all the best ideas of this group? Where's the knowledge that's never been created before, never touched before? And what tool or technique or software or personality types do we need? What roles do we need to have the most effective innovation, decision-making, sense-making? It's got that angle to it. OD would say, that's interesting. Okay, you're focused on decision-making. Great. That is one thing that a group can focus on. What about power? Where's the power in this group? What about trust in this group? See, OD would say there's so many other things we could focus on in this group. And that's, again, that partnership between ODKM, these dialogic tools. This is compared to dynamic, dialogic, and diagnostic. Dialogic OD is so close to KM. In fact, if you're a KM person and you're sort of looking to get into OD, Dialogic OD is your front door. Because you'll come in saying, I already know all this. Like a lot of many people when they start their KM career, they start learning some KM techniques and they say, oh, this is just how I ran my meetings. This is just how I did things. I didn't know it had a name or a label or a process to it. I was just a collaborative person, and they get excited about KM. I would think that potentially, if you're on this call to hear more about OD, that Dialogic OD door is a door you could step right in and say, oh, I'm actually kind of at home. I think I already recognize a lot of these techniques. And the ones that you don't recognize, you'll just, get it? It'll just click as soon as you hear, if you've never done appreciative inquiry before, which is more of an OD tool than a KM tool, you'll love it. You'll see the process of it and you'll get it. Open space technology, another one. If you haven't done that from a KM point of view, it's more of an OD technique. You'll recognize it. You'll see right away what's going on there. So I like Dialogic OD as a door to OD for KMers.
Yeah. And, there's a great point there, actually, which is, I would say, because OD is a huge field, it can be off-putting. And that's why this framework is designed to be helpful. But it also means that for almost everybody who kind of shows up in one of our classes, they've got connections into the field already. There's already strengths that they bring. There's tools that they know. There's skills that they have. And actually, that is one of the key things that we do, and deliberately start there with, well, what is OD and where are you coming from? What are you already bringing into the field and into the group as we are working together, so that you can start where you are and actually then our invitation, quite gentle actually, is, find out where you are and then take a step. So, you might be brand new to OD and like, I'm just figuring out what the O and the D stand for, but it sounds great. And I'm just gonna show up. Great. You're really welcome. And, there will be a place that you start and, take another step. There's other people who may have been working in OD for 20 years and similar. There will be steps. There will be a next step for everybody who joins. And, Well, if we've got time, we'll finish dynamic OD and we'll come back to use of self, which I think really is saying, one of the things it's saying is it's all about learning. We're constantly developing ourselves as practitioners in OD. So, John, what about dynamic OD?
Let's see, I'm on a different screen. Did I come off mute? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, great. Okay, so dynamic OD, starting with the OD perspective, is the newest. So this would be more like knowledge creation on Nancy Dixon's chart, or at least idea management at the top of her chart, like, 2010-ish. It is probably a little bit older from a dynamic OD point of view, give or take. We mostly talk about dynamics. We talk about action. Think of like an activist. Think of like, go take an action and then see what happened to the group. That kind of dynamic OD compared to having a conversation, which you still might do in dynamic OD, or compared to gathering data, which is more diagnostic. So let's compare that then to KM. What is there such thing as like a dynamic KM? Well, Stephanie Barnes is a big time person at KMI and teaches a course here too. She talks about radical KM. And in her radical KM, she takes people, process, technology, and she adds in creativity. She adds in painting, drawing, meditation, that kind of stuff. So do you see, like, she's adding an action saying that's missing so much from our work lives that no wonder we can't co-create and co-emerge and have relationships that are across people, because we're so busy, so focused on our tasks, we don't have time to get into that part of our body. So that's that radical KM that she talks about, to me, is an example of like a dynamic KM. I would also just think of like the tools and techniques we do, like, KM relates to project management so much when we're like planning. I have several clients that are planning communities of practice. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, no one's going to do this. No one's going to come to our meetings. Like, we have to have the perfect community of practice before we even unveil it and invite people to it. Great. I understand some of that. Don't let me play that down too much. But I'm trying to give an example of like a dynamic KM where you could just hold your first community of practice meeting. Just take an action. Be an activist. Try something, KM, and then look back and say, oh, that first meeting didn't really work for us, or that first community of practice meeting was great. Another great example would be organizational network analysis. If you're trying to map out the informal network, very KM technique, pretty hot right now, been hot for a little while. Let's on a piece of paper, get the social network mapped out. You can plan and try to get buy-in and budget to do an organizational network analysis and actually never get to the point of gathering the data and drawing the map. Whereas in a dynamic KM kind of environment, you would just start talking to people, start gathering the data, create the map, put it in software, build the O&A, jump in and take the action so that you can see what happens to the group and you can see what happens content and process-wise as well. What else did I miss from a dynamic OD KM perspective, Sharon?
Do you know, I'd take one step further back and actually say, so relating it to communities of practice, but actually paying attention to the action that's already happening. So where are communities tending to form, and in your particular context, what is helping them to form? So rather than kind of, oh, I've got a great idea, a community of practice, so how do I bring that in and get buy-in and take it through the hierarchy, is actually really attending to the dynamics, really noticing, paying attention to the patterning. Dynamic patterning is what I talk about in this in this work is really, well, where is that already happening? Even informally, and then trying to take those dynamics and work with them. So do you see the difference? You know, we started with how do we get buy-in? It's a very different start point with dynamic OD, that it's already happening. We're not having to get buy-in. People are already bought in. So how do we understand that action, follow the action, create the conditions whereby, you know, those kind of practices of communities might flourish, you know, and how could we learn in other parts of the organization from areas that are already working? So dynamic OD is underpinned by complexity science, which is my favorite thing. So yeah, if you kind of see the world in connections and things and movement, then you may be joining from that kind of dynamic OD perspective.
And then I can make another great tie there with, you know, Sharon is world-class change and complexity. And who's one of our great friends in KM? Dave Snowden KNEVin framework, right? Like, he would say he has got a KM background, and yet complexity tends to fall more squarely in an OD space. So yet another simple, beautiful, already, like you're talking about, we're already doing KM things, we're already doing OD things. There are already things like the KNEVin framework, for those that are familiar with it, that are literally a bridge between KM and OD. So if you like KNEVin, if you like that kind of simple versus complicated versus complex versus chaotic or disorder, there you go. Another door to step right through and say, okay, I think I've seen some of this before. Now what do I do?
Absolutely. And even if you don't like it, you know, actually just engaging with whose workplace doesn't have complexity. Well, probably there's no people if you don't. So,
exactly.
You know, this kind of, you know, can't manage knowledge, can't manage people, can't manage complexity. That's a theme, but we're not trying to manage in that very traditional way. We are trying to engage with complexity, engage with people, engage and, you know, create knowledge and flows through that process. So just looking at the timing, so we have maybe 22 minutes left, and let's do a couple of minutes on use of self, because I think we can then come back to some of the questions that are coming up in chat. So John, are you in a position where you can chat use of self, or have you got background?
I do have a little background, but hopefully he'll wrap up here in a second. Hopefully you can still hear me. Yes, love use self. Put it right up, use of self. Put it right up there with Dialogic OD. I think this is fundamentally what's missing from the field of knowledge management. That's how blunt and direct I would say this.
Wow.
I think what can I say we include myself there, in OD, Sharon says it better than I do, about if you're not using yourself, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but if you're not aware of yourself, you're not really doing OD, or at least maybe unethically doing OD, because you really need to realize what you're bringing in. You're part of the group that you're working with. And so if you're not aware of that, then you're missing a lot. Whereas in KM, we can skate past that. We can say, no, you know, it's the old joke of knowledge management. Like, if somebody brings you a document and says, here, you're the knowledge manager, you manage my document and put it in SharePoint, please. And we're like, whoa, you're missing the whole point of, like, we're the gardener, we're the architect, we're creating an environment for information and knowledge to flow. We're not putting it in a database for you. Like, that should just be automated, right? So that kind of thing. What's missing from KM is that, from a use of self OD point of view, is you probably did realize, but I just want to shine a bright light on, how aware are you that you are bringing your own knowledge into the knowledge management environment? That's the tie I would make. I think it's easily overlooked. I think we sort of look outside of ourselves and look to them, look to the people, dare I say, look to the users, and everything's kind of put out like, here's a community practice, please everybody go use it. Here's a knowledge transfer team, please everybody go follow that process. You, the knowledge manager, the person on this call, you are also bringing tremendous knowledge. how does that get used in addition to setting up the knowledge environment? You've got your own ideas, your own innovations, right? Are you bringing your full self, all of your emotions, all your thoughts, all your bodily sensations? Is that coming into the KM? Are you willing and aware of how much or how little of yourself brings in to KM? Whereas an OD, it's a core foundational practice. Sometimes I compare it with the way I was taught is to think about journalism. I think about like newspapers and TV shows where the people writing the article or on TV presenting what's happening in real life behind them, they're trained. I'm not trained this way, but my understanding is they're trained to remove themselves. They're supposed to be stating the raw truth of what's going on. Don't bring your bias in. Just state the facts of what's going on behind you. It's kind of the polar opposite in OD where we're like, no, no, no. When I join a group and I'm facilitating a group and we're trying to do a force field analysis, is the example we used before, I have to be aware that I'm bringing in my bias. I'm bringing in my judgments. I'm bringing in my opinions. And it's the intentional, conscious use and awareness of those opinions and judgments and experiences that an OD practitioner has to have awareness of. They are every person is having an impact on the group. You're not just watching from the outside and facilitating a group as if you weren't part of it. I think if KM had some kind of use of self or use of knowledge, application of knowledge, I'm not even sure what to call it. We could all geek out together and figure out what it is, but there is something in the whole discipline of KM that could learn and partner with use of self in OD. I probably didn't describe use of self well enough there, Sharon. Could you help me out with like what is use of self from an OD point of view?
It's such a big area that I think, it's one of those things that, on the course it comes in the final day. We kind of do work and then it becomes a little bit more obvious. But what I think John said really, really beautifully is it's about awareness, it's about choices. So in my book I talk about the inner self, and our inner self turns up anyway. We can't remove our inner self. It shows up in the outside world. But the question is, what choices are we making about how our inner self shows up in the outside world? How we use that kind of, all of our inner resources, even in a diagnostic way, to kind of notice what's going on, to pick up the vibe in groups, that becomes a bit of a lifelong journey. So there is something about use of self that just says, stay interested in how we are coming into any particular group or piece of work, or how we are showing up in a situation. So oversimplified, but I just want to kind of, bring it into this very short webinar, and we're happy to explore that. We're happy to explore more of the 3Ds, use of self, and any other questions that you might have today. Okay, so I'm wondering, does it feel like question time, John?
Sure does. And I was on my phone trying to look at chat, and I saw Eric's posts in chat, but I didn't see any other questions. It could just be on my phone. So
okay, well,
yeah, ready to hear a question.
Let's start with Carrie's question, because she came in super early with this one, and I think it's a good question. And I wonder also, Carrie, whether your own thinking about this question may have changed during the webinar. So Carrie asks about buy-in, and how many presentations do you create for the different audiences you need to bring on board? And I love that connection with the different audiences. So John, do you want to start with this one?
How many different presentations do you do to get buy-in? Let's try it from to me, like the point of this call is like, what do KM people need to know about OD? So let's try, I'm going to be making this up on the fly. What's a KM approach to a bunch of different presentations for buy-in, and what's an OD approach? Just my own personal bias to it. I think if I didn't have any OD and I was doing pure KM and I was, working with senior leaders and middle managers and individual contributors, then I would be doing a lot of intellectual work. I would try and say, senior managers want to get great talent in. So how does KM get great talent in? Let's create a slide on that. Senior managers want to make more money. If you're in a for-profit company, there's probably a lot of government people here. So senior leaders want to, serve the officer. They want to meet the mission. They want to save money for taxpayers, right? Like that kind of stuff. Support the war fighter. You'd have that kind of language, senior leader. So I'd intellectually saying KM does this and this and this, which supports your mission. That would be my kind of KM approach to getting buy-in with a bunch of different presentations. From an OD perspective, I would say, it's interesting. Let me talk to a few people. I wonder where this phrasing of buy-in came from. Could we do a couple of quick interviews and find out what's the definition of buy-in and what does each person mean? Because this person over here, I'm going to make this story up, this person over here, buy-in meant time and priority. Like I need a charge code and I need to know how much time per week to spend on communities of practice. And this person over here, buy-in to them meant I just want my senior leader to put knowledge management in my job title so that I get recognition and people understand. And this other person, buy-in meant, well, I need the senior leader to go to all of their other meetings and talk about knowledge management for me. And that would be what buy-in, so OD would come in and say, you're looking for buy-in. I hear you. I validate that. I understand it. Can we unpack it and talk about what do we mean by OD? What are some what do we mean by buy-in? What are some synonyms for buy-in? Do you see how like KM is trying to get information and knowledge and intellect shared and co-created, and OD is trying to sort of unpack what's going on here? Why is buy-in present for this group? Why is buy-in the word we're using as opposed to resistance, as opposed to understanding, as opposed to training, right? Like, is there some other word for buy-in? And OD would kind of go that route, I think. Would you agree or do it differently, Sharon?
Yeah, I love that, and thank you so much, Carrie, for bringing that great question in, because it starts to make us really think about, well, what are the similarities and differences between KM and OD? And we hear John, really trying to voice that. No, beautifully. I was also thinking back again to just very practical example where we were doing some client work. And, there was a 15-minute opportunity for presentations back to the client. So the client showed up with a challenge, it's real for them. There was a meeting with the client. They did some work, and then they had a 15-minute presentation. But actually, those presentation sessions were very, very facilitative. So there was no PowerPoint. There was a little bit of holding a mirror up. So we saw a couple of direct quotes that the client had brought into the conversation earlier, just written up on flip charts, literally just held there, reflected back. And then what do you make of this? How do you feel when you see those quotes? What does it mean to you? So then, rather than presenting to, the client is continuing, the person who brought the challenge is continuing to think through their challenge. And of course, they know their world way better than we know their world. So it's kind of about that questioning, well, what is in it for you? Is I guess people know that better for themselves than we would know. So rather than trying to sort of present and sell the benefits, it's really trying to help people recognize where they are and what they might need from something, even if we've got some super tools. Don't want to just say, here's an amazing tool, how are you gonna use it? I've created a thing, and people go, great, well done you. Here's my world, here's my challenge. So start with where the client is, perhaps. Thank you. Any other questions coming up?
I see the number 8 on the chat, but it's hard for me to click on it on my phone. So I don't know if those are new questions or comments.
Yeah. couple of people going, yeah, my first dive into OD. Welcome. It's very inclusive. You're very welcome into the very broad OD community. So it's been great today. What about you, Eric? What kind of questions are coming up for you, or anything that you'd love us to dig into a little bit more?
No, I think you handled that really well. Thank you both. Yeah, I would say for us, if there's any questions about the course, it's a 3-day class, very immersive, very interactive, unusual, fun, entertaining, and so informative. So it's just a great experience. If you're interested in that, we'll be happy to send you a discounted quote for joining the call with us live today. But yeah, we're on standby for that. I'll put in our team email address if there are questions about that. But and of course, you know about the webinar, the previous webinar we've done. If you'd like to dig in some more about the topic, we'll be happy to give you some more links and where to go, and any background information we can provide, we'll be happy to do that for you. We'll put our email in real quick.
Yeah, unless any final questions come in, a big thank you for me thank you and apology for background noise and being at a train station, and an extra thanks to Eric, and especially you, Sharon. Great to work with you, and see you in person very soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Great to meet you all. Stay in touch. We're both on LinkedIn, so you can say hi there as well.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Eric.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Sharon.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.